I'm here today with Kathleen Long Bostrom. Kathy is a full-time writer and ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, having served churches for 30 years. Kathy's books, over 40 of which she's published, mostly picture books for young children, have sold over 2 million copies. Her Little Blessings series from Tyndale House is printed in 20 different languages, and Stories from the Bible is also published in languages around the world. She's past president of the Presbyterian Writers Guild and currently a member of that guild, as well as the Authors Guild, PEN, and the Society of Children's Books, Writers, and Illustrators, the San Diego chapter. Kathy was named a 2013 Distinguished Alumna of Princeton Theological Seminary, in large part for her ministry of books for children. She's the 2014 David Steele Distinguished Writer, the most prestigious writers award given by the Presbyterian Church. She's taught classes on writing at the Beekner Conference that we did together in 2016, and at Writing for Your Life conferences, and at our children's book conference that we just recently completed this fall. So, Kathy, it's such a pleasure, as always, to be able to be with you here today.
Thanks, Brian. It's a pleasure for me, too. I appreciate always your support and giving me opportunities to speak on or share about my books. So grateful that we can continue to work together, and thankful for Zoom.
Absolutely. Yes. We were just talking before how wonderful it is. Kathy lives in California. I live in New Jersey, and, we're friends from afar. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter. We can collaborate. We can work together. We can do all kinds of things together.
Right. You feel like you're sitting in the same room with someone when you do this. So
Yeah. So, before we kind of dive into your latest books, let's talk about, kind of how you got started in writing.
Yeah, it's an interesting story in that people always want to find out, did you always want to be a writer? Did you always want to write books? Did you always want to write children's books? And the answer to all those questions is it's not something I really thought about growing up. I just loved books and I loved reading. And so naturally, when my children were born, Greg and I did lots of reading with them, lots of books, our childhood favorites, and then we developed new childhood favorites with them. And I just loved it. That was, to me, working in a church that was growing and dealing with chronic illness and different things, reading to my children, reading with my children was the most special time of the day. And we both made a point of doing that. I did write a book when I was in 6th grade with a friend. I still have it tucked away, so maybe I should dig that out someday. So I always enjoyed writing, and I got good feedback from my teachers about it. And when I was preaching, I got good feedback from people saying, "You're such a great writer." So maybe that meant I wasn't such a great preacher, but they liked the way I wrote my sermon. Anyway, so I remember distinctly one afternoon when our youngest son was 3. He just turned 31, so that's how long ago that was. And I was rocking him to sleep before his afternoon nap, and we were reading one of his favorite books. I still remember it, Charlie the Caterpillar by Dom DeLuise. He loved that book, and we just read it over and over and over. And his little guy was cuddled in my arms, and I thought, this is like the best. And I want to just capture this moment and remember it forever. I knew he was our last child, and I just wanted to just soak every minute in. And I thought these will be some of my best memories later as he grows up, as all our kids grow up, and hopefully for my children too, the reading time that we did with them will one day be their cherished memories. And then it hit me. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to write a children's book that other parents or grandparents or adults could share with a child, and that one of my books could help them capture that moment that I was in with mine. To me, that just sounded like a wonderful thing to be able to do. So I just started writing books for children, manuscripts, I should say, lullabies and bedtime stories, and trying to learn the process of writing. took a long time. In those days, back when you had to send every manuscript out in the mail, and you had to send a self-addressed stamped postcard so you could get a response. There wasn't email; it was just starting, so it was all a very slow process. But I was determined. I sent out manuscripts for 4 years. I amassed 250 rejection letters before I got my foot in the door. And that book, What is God Like, was actually based on a conversation with a child in church who wanted to know if God was a girl or a boy. And so I was trying to answer that question. She asked me that when I was racing into worship one Sunday morning. I said, let me get back to you on that. So it took a while. But so working in a church and having children of my own and having a church full of children, I was, I think that's where my focus started shifting into books for the Christian market. And so that's been really where I've had my foundation. I didn't set out to do that. It just, by the grace of God, is the direction my life took. And so I've had a few books for the secular market, but most of mine took a long time.
Well, I mean, that your story is like one that I want every single aspiring writer to hear. And I often, use that as an example. I mean, you've published over 40 books. You've sold
over 50 now.
Over 50 now? Is it really? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I need to update your bio. So over 50 books, over 2 million copies, and it took you 250 rejections before you got your first yes.
Yeah.
Holy tamale. I mean,
I have all those letters. I saved them. So I've gone and talked to schools and said, let me show you how many times someone said no. And this youngest son that I was mentioning is curled up in my lap reading. He was so little when I started writing. So as far as he knew, my whole life was being rejected. So as the years went on and nothing happened, and I'd come home with another rejection, because I was very open with the family about what was going on. So so this is a good Christmas story since we're getting into that season. One Christmas, we took our kids to see Santa, and it was his turn to sit on Santa's lap. And Santa's like, okay, little boy, what would you like for Christmas? And David just went, oh, please, would you just publish my mom's books? Nope, Santa ever got that question before. I think that poor little girl, oh, please, does somebody do this for her? So they were all part of that long, enduring process.
My goodness. Oh, that's great. Well, speaking of Christmas, one of the books that we want to talk about specifically is The Worst Christmas Ever. So tell us about the story of where that's been and where it's going.
Yeah, that's so this was the second of my books that turned out to be a book that was originally a sermon. Well, not the second Christmas story. So Greg and we had a church in Illinois that was growing by leaps and bounds with lots of families, lots and lots of young children. So we were the co-pastors. We at one Christmas, we were inspired by Catherine Patterson, actually. She was married to a Presbyterian pastor, wonderful guy, John. And so every year she would write him a story and he would preach that for Christmas Eve. And so for several years, Greg and I used Catherine Patterson's stories, giving her credit, and preached a Christmas Eve sermon that was a story. And so then we decided to start writing our own. And he did, and I did. And so this originally was a Christmas Eve sermon, and it came in a very tough year for our church and for our family. I was that year struggling with PTSD because of a really violent crime against our family a few years before. A young man in our congregation who had just turned 21 was killed in Afghanistan, an Army Ranger. We'd known him since he was 2. He was one of our son's best friends. And I was unraveling. And then my father died And so it was a really tough, the whole church was in such terrible, deep grief for the loss of this young man. And I was still struggling with PTSD and my dad's loss. So I knew I needed to, and it was my turn to preach the Christmas Eve sermon. But I knew I wanted to tell a story that had some hope to it, but I couldn't go too deep. We were all just, the grief is just like palpable at times like that, and you don't want to poke it too hard. But if any time is a time for a hopeful story, Christmas. So I had been inspired by a picture I had seen on Facebook a few years before that had, and I should have gotten it out for this, is a picture of a little German shepherd curled up in a manger. And that went around the internet for a few years. And I just was, and I started thinking now, how did that dog get in the manger? And what's the story behind that, And so I started crafting a story around that picture. And it ended up being a story of a little boy whose family moves from the Midwest to California. This was before I moved back to California. And nothing feels right to him anymore. And he struggles, especially at Christmas time, because there's no snow and there was no fall and there's pink Christmas trees and, all the things I grew up with growing up in California, feeling like it wasn't really Christmas, even though I'd grown up that way. So I tried to draw upon those feelings of change, where something in this child's life had changed drastically, without talking about death, specifically, even though that was what our church was suffering, the grief from. So this story becomes this little boy who moves and nothing feels right. And then a few days before Christmas Eve, his dog runs away. His dog, who is his solace and comfort, disappears chasing after a squirrel and they can't find him. So that was the genesis for writing this story of the worst Christmas ever, for this little boy who felt so lost and alone and had just lost his very special friend. So, of course, the story has a hopeful ending, and the dog ends up in the manger on Christmas Eve. And so that's how I reconciled that German shepherd of long ago, and how that the final bit in the book is just, and I'll just read that briefly, because this was the message I wanted the church the church family to hear that Christmas Eve when we were so all struggling. It didn't matter now that there was no snow and that they'd almost had a pink Christmas tree. Christmas had come, right in the middle of Matthew's feeling lost in the world, just as it had come that first Christmas long ago, ready or not. So the Christmas story of coming to, a faraway land in a strange place, and the hope of that Christmas, I tried to echo in a book where a little boy is in a strange land in a faraway place, and yet Christmas comes in the midst of no matter what happens, in the midst of everything. Christmas is going to happen. And that was the message I wanted to say that Christmas. Christmas is still happening. Christmas is still here. Christ has come into the world and into our hearts, and Christ will come again. So that's how that book took place.
Wow, what a beautiful story. And the book was just originally published a year ago, right? But they're republishing it this year. Is that correct?
They're relaunching it, right? So it took a few years to turn from the sermon into a storybook and into a finished book. And I had the joy of working with an illustrator who'd done a Christmas, not a Christmas story, a story on death, a few years, many years before actually Papa's Gift, and loved working with him. So he illustrated this book. So that was a great joy. But yes, it came out last year with Flyaway Books, and a beautiful Christmas book by Catherine Patterson came out last year too, on the night of his birth. Very different stories. And they're relaunching. Flyaway doesn't have a new Christmas book this year, so they're being gracious and relaunching these. So I'm putting together a launch team and trying to get it back out into the world. It's difficult with the COVID. They're, trying to get into, you don't have bookstore signings like we're used to having, and author events like we're used to having. So we have to be very creative with ways of getting books out into the world. So I'm grateful to Flyway for wanting to give it a second life, and hope it will reach into the hearts and homes of people this year too.
Well, we'll do some more promotion of it, through Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity. And, hopefully this book launch interview will help a little bit too.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
So the other new book, Will You Be Friends with Me? You want to talk about that one a little bit?
Sure. Now that's one of the very few books I have that's a secular, what you'd say is a secular book. But like all my books, based on what I feel is my foundation of a Christian faith. So as I was writing this board book about friendship, I wanted to write a book that showed how differences were good things, or how can we have our differences work together. So the foundation I was keeping in my head, because it's published by Worthy Books, which is a Christian publishing house. So even though the Bible isn't mentioned, there isn't scripture references in my mind. I was thinking of the Corinthians and all the passages Paul writes about the body being one, but having many members, and that we're all equally important. And so that was sort of my foundation in writing this book. So I had a lot of fun. I was thinking of different things, ways that children or people are different, things that we like, things that we eat, ways of our personality. So trying to touch on all these different ways that we're different. And originally I wanted to show how those things blended together. So like you like orange, I like pink. And later in the book, when they came together, I was going to envision a sunset sky where you have orange and pink together in the sky. But as I tried to do that and make the things fit, and I worked with my writing critique group, my wonderful group, we became together, figured out that maybe it was better to show that differences are different, and you don't have to make a match. You don't have to make them blend. That it's the differences that make life fun, So, so that once I kind of shifted gears that way, the book really just kind of wrote it. I wouldn't say it wrote itself. It took a few months, and it was many, many different drafts. But I just get so energized when I really finally figure out the key to a story or a book. So what I did with it was then show children. I imagined it between two children, like one saying, and because I'm a very shy person, really, I'm such an extreme introvert. Making friends was always hard for me. So in my mind, as I wrote this, that one child is seeing this other child, and it's like, well, she or he's so different, and asking sort of tentatively, but will you be friends with me? Like wanting to be friends with this child who's different. The illustrator and the publisher actually, that my editor had a brilliant idea of having what's called a daisy chain. So instead of just having this back and forth between two children that look different, one child asks this child, and this child is in the next scene asking this child, and then that child's in the next scene asking this child. It was so brilliant that she came up with this.
It's such a great book. And my daughters, who both have small children, love reading that book to them, and the kids love it too. It's such a neat sequence, like you said.
Yeah, it really added so much to it, and the illustrator then using that, you then could have children, a lot more children in the story, so that there was a lot of opportunity for more diversity, which I felt was really important. I wanted that in the book, but the way it turned out was beyond even what I could have imagined. And so you have children that are very different. And so it really conveys the message through the art. So I'm very grateful when I have illustrators, all my illustrators who do a brilliant job in adding so many deeper layers to the text itself.
Very cool.
Mhm.
Would you mind reading some of it to us?
Okay. It's short, so I could read the whole thing.
Excellent. That'd be great.
Let me see how well I do this. Uh, so here we are. I have a question for you all out there listening. Will you be friends with me, even though we're different? So I wake early, you sleep late. My hair's curly, yours is straight. I say now, you say wait. Will you be friends with me? I like orange, you like pink. I use crayon, you use ink. Which is better, do you think? Will you be friends with me? I am messy, you are neat. I like salty, you like sweet. What's your favorite treat to eat? Will you be friends with me? Let's play leapfrog, jump up high. Maybe we will touch the sky. We can do it if we try. Will you be friends with me? I like morning. You like night. We're just different. That's all right. We don't need to fuss or fight. Will you be friends with me? Straight or curly, it's just hair. Ink or crayon, we can share. Neat or messy, I don't care. Will you be friends with me? We are all different. That's okay. Life is much more fun that way. You will be my friend. Hooray! I'm glad you're friends with me. So you see how that's the end. The end. Thank you, everyone. How they have the whole lineup of kids all together. So it's just a wonderful way they put this together. So I'm very happy.
Yeah, it's very diverse and inclusive, which, is great, of course. And, wonderfully illustrated and, just a great, story for kids to be able to hear, in today's world. So it's a great role model.
Yeah, write it out now. I think we all need to think, well, we can be friends with people who are different from us.
Yes.
Because there's so much division and antagonism going on. And it's like, no, we can be different. We can find a common ground. And maybe our differences can make life better, not necessarily worse. That's okay. That's good. We should be different. We should be who we are and cherish others for who they are. So
Absolutely. So with the video, I'll put links to, those books, but the one you just read is from Worthy Kids.
Right.
And The Worst Christmas Ever is from Flyway Books. Is that right?
Right. That's part of Presbyterian publishing.
Yeah. And they're both orderable, so you don't have to wait. They're both available. So that's all good news.
Yeah. And I always encourage people as much as possible. And I don't always do it myself. I try to support your independent bookstores. When I started publishing, there were children's bookstores everywhere, and they all had my books front and center. They had me do author signings. They did everything they could. And one by one, they went out of business. And so it's really tough to get a book out in the world, but it's very tough for some of these independent stores to, survive when other places sell their books so much cheaper. So yes, I do order books online, but yes, I also try to order from independent bookstores. So that's my little plug for the independents. I hope that's okay. We need to support the people who are out there giving it their all.
Absolutely. But we need to support the authors too, and so,
yeah. So
I'll figure out some additional ways to help get the word out about, children's books, because as you said, the traditional methods for doing that are, either not available or very scarce at the moment.
Right. I'm glad for lots of options, and I think that's good. Anything that gets books into the hands of people is a good thing. So
Yes, yes. Well, Kathy, thanks very much for joining us and telling us your story. And, your new books are exciting. And as I said, they've been a hit with my family, so I'm sure they're going to be a hit with many families.
thank you. My pleasure. And thank you, Brian, again for another opportunity to talk about books and the joy of reading and writing.
Well, thanks so much, Kathy.
Okay.